Let's dive right into this explainer. We usually picture the 1950s as this neat black and white era of simple standoff diplomacy. But behind the scenes, literally miles above the Earth, a top-secret spy plane called the U-2 was completely rewriting the rules of the Cold War. Today, we're unpacking the intense reality of the pilots who flew these things, the brilliant analysts who decode the intel, and the massive burden placed on President Dwight D. Eisenhower. The guys suddenly held all the world's secrets but couldn't tell a single soul.
I hate this goddamn place. We're starting our story far, far away from Washington, D.C., with a wildly jarring, definitely unglamorous wake-up call. Picture this. It's 1956, at an airbase outside Adana, Turkey. You might wake up to the completely absurd sound of a frustrated naked American pilot smashing an empty metal washtub with a baseball bat. It was an environment of intense heat, extreme isolation, and just unbelievable tension.
And that tension? It was there for a very good reason. Officially, these guys were part of the 2nd Provisional Weather Squadron, but as you might guess, that was just a really clever cover story. In reality, they were a CIA front. These gaunt pilots were living in isolated, rat-infested trailers, eating absolutely terrible food, with zero connection to the outside world. They were just waiting. Waiting for the highly classified order to fly straight into Soviet airspace. Moving to Section 1, the pilots. Life at 70,000 feet.
The sheer physical toll these missions demanded was just staggering. Every single flight kicked off with this incredibly tense routine. The night before, a pilot had to take Air Force sleeping pills just to catch a wink of sleep. The next morning, before even getting into the cockpit, he's breathing pure oxygen through a hose just to purge nitrogen from his blood and avoid the bends. Then, the launch. The jet engine lets out this terrifying banshee cry, the ground drops away like a trap door, and these weird pogo sticks that supported the long wings just literally drop right off. Fun fact, one time a pogo fell through the roof of a local mosque, and the worshippers thought it fell straight from heaven. But once they hit 70,000 feet, it was no paradise. The pilots faced the constant, terrifying threat of an engine flameout in the super-thin stratosphere, basically praying their plane would restart before they glided down into hostile territory.
All right, Section 2, zooming out. The Suez Crisis. Let's see what happened when the U-2 faced its first major operational test on the global stage.
So imagine you're President Eisenhower and you suddenly realize your closest allies are actively deceiving you. Over just a few weeks in the fall of 1956, the U-2 became absolutely crucial. Britain, France, and Israel were secretly scheming to attack Egypt to grab control of the Suez Canal, and they were hiding the whole thing from the United States. But they couldn't hide from the U-2s flying high over the Mediterranean. By mid-October, photos showed French fighter jets secretly multiplying in Israel. A week later, they caught British naval convoys massing together. By the time Israeli paratroopers actually dropped into the Sinai, Eisenhower was already fully read in on the entire deception. By Halloween, the U-2 was snapping these crystal-clear shots of burning Egyptian military planes. The immediate bomb damage assessments were so incredibly fast that the CIA actually handed them straight to the British Royal Air Force, who politely cabled back that it was the quickest assessment they'd ever seen. For Eisenhower, having this kind of unmatched, real-time clarity let him force a rapid ceasefire and navigate a massive geopolitical crisis without accidentally stumbling into a wider war. Which brings us to Section 3. The analysts, the mechanics of secrecy. We've talked about the pilots, now let's look at the folks actually decoding these world-altering photos. In a brilliant twist of irony, the most high-tech intelligence of the entire era was being processed by analysts in a place codenamed U-2 Automate. Now, this vital national security lab was not in some shiny wing of the Pentagon. Nope, it was hidden on the upper floors of a rundown Ford car repair shop in Washington, D.C. The neighborhood was so rough that top-tier officials, we're talking Richard Nixon and the Secretary of State, literally had to step over garbage and rats just to get inside for their secret briefings. It was so completely unassuming that no one ever suspected a thing.
So, why the number 4? Well, to put the sheer volume of data into perspective, the raw photographic film from just one single U-2 mission was so massive that if you unrolled it, it would completely cover all 4 lanes of the Baltimore-Washington Turnpike from end to end. It was literally a tsunami of intelligence.
And these analysts didn't just write up boring reports about this film, they brought it straight to the top. The team brought massive photographic boards, some of these things were as big as a couch, right into the Oval Office. This let President Eisenhower pop on his reading glasses and literally look down from 70,000 feet right onto Soviet factories, railroads, and hidden bomber fields. He was seeing a world that no American leader had ever had access to before. Talk about an ultimate strategic advantage.
That takes us to Section 4, the president, a tight leash, because capturing these pictures was incredibly risky.
You see, getting a U-2 up in the air was no walk in the park. It took a super rigorous approval process. First, a committee proposes a target. Then, CIA project head Richard Bissell reviews it. But the flight still wouldn't happen unless the Secretary of State gave his blessing. And finally, President Eisenhower personally gave the ultimate okay. Eisenhower would actually lean right over the maps and micromanage the flight paths himself, saying stuff like, "Let's go from B to D to avoid a rocket." This incredibly strict chain of command made absolutely sure that no flight happened without his final say-so, keeping the risk of accidentally starting World War III as low as humanly possible.
All right, Section 5, zooming out, a global spy network. Driven by their massive success, the U-2 program expanded really quickly. The CIA affectionately called this whole operation Richard Bissell's Air Force. Just look at this operational footprint. They were staging flights out of Turkey, Japan, Pakistan, secret dirt strips out in the Iranian desert, and even Norway. They even ran joint missions where British RAF pilots flew the American U-2s just so the operations could have dual authorization. But it's important to remember, this entire global web relied heavily on highly sensitive covert agreements with allied nations, which put those host governments at serious risk of Soviet retaliation.
And honestly, they were spying on practically everyone. They photographed everything from Soviet nuclear test sites in Siberia to the Chinese mainland. There's actually a fantastic story where the analysts briefly went into a total panic because a U-2 photo seemed to show this massive Chinese missile pointed right at Taiwan. But after a much closer, definitely sweat-inducing inspection, the terrifying missile turned out to be a 12th century stone watchtower. Psh. Okay, moving to Section 6, the climax, Sputnik and the burden of knowledge. This is where incredible secret intelligence collides with massive public panic. In October 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik. Millions of Americans literally ran out to their front lawns to watch it soar overhead, listening for those eerie radio beeps. And the nation was absolutely terrified. A highly publicized document called the Gaither Report completely convinced the American public that the Soviets had this massive, unstoppable fleet of bombers and ICBMs just waiting to strike the U.S. at any given moment. So, look at this dramatic split reality unfolding. On one side, you have an entire public completely panicking over a supposed bomber gap and missile gap. But on the other side is the secret reality. Eisenhower had the U-2 photographs. He knew, for a fact, that the bomber gap was a total myth. The Soviets were probably just flying the same few planes in circles at their air shows to look tough. He knew there was no massive missile buildup. He knew the United States was in reality completely safe. But here's the catch. He couldn't say a word. Eisenhower was facing a profound irony. He had unparalleled clarity, probably more than any leader in history up to that point. But the absolute secrecy required to keep those U-2s flying forced him to just sit there and take intense public criticism. His poll numbers absolutely tanked. He was accused of being complacent, of falling asleep at the wheel while the Soviets supposedly prepared for war. Seriously, put yourself in his shoes for a second. If revealing those photos meant calming the entire public but losing your single greatest intelligence asset, what would you do? He chose to take the political hits in total silence. Which leaves us with this final, truly paradoxical thought to chew on as we wrap up this explainer. Consider the heavy burden of that knowledge. Is having the absolute, secret truth really worth it, if it means you have to sit back and watch your own country tear itself apart in fear? It's a massive question of leadership and secrecy that resonates way beyond the 1950s. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the skies of the Cold War. Keep questioning what you see, and I'll catch you on the next one.